The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision.
Hello, this is Brian Mendola, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, June 13th and 14th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Let's get started. Article, The Invention of the Trillionaire by T.J. Stiles. The Gilded Age Titans did more than build railroads. They paved the way for reinvention of the stock market and the creation of a runaway wealth. On September 28, 1916, 5 years after U.S. Supreme Court famously ordered the breakup of Standard Oil founder J.D. Rockefeller Sr., became the first billionaire. The Sherman Antitrust Act must have been designed to rein in corporate power, but it did nothing to slow Rockefeller's massive accumulation of wealth. Even as the federal government battled monopolies in court, sometimes something else happened that made unprecedented fortunes possible. A revolutionary way of thinking about stock. Just a decade before Rockefeller's triumph, Americans resolved a hugely consequential debate over a fundamental question that still defines our economy today. What is a share? Today we think a share is simply a unit of ownership. Its value determined by the market, and the investor hopes the value will continually rise. But these notions would have shocked the public in 1880 or even 1900s. The 19th century metal architecture of finance was concrete, built directly on the physical world. A share stood for a set amount of tangible stuff, which limited stock volume and value. This view was defended by the financial journalist Henry Poor, memorialized in Standard and Poor, Theodore Roosevelt, and the editors of the Wall Street Journal, who argued back in 1901 that U.S. steel should, quote, represent the value of the plant, end quote. But financiers like Jay Gould, J.P. Morgan, and Rockefeller pushed a new, more abstract mindset. They broke the link between the value of a share and the physical things. It led to the birth of the modern stock market, which would go on to produce a historic run of personal wealth creation, becoming the very mechanism that would turn Rockefeller into the world's first billionaire. It is the same mechanism that empowered Elon Musk to become the first trillionaire. Like so many arguments over the corporation in American history, this one started with the railroads. The first truly big business in America. Cornelius Vanderbilt was arguably the first railroad tycoon to dominate the stock exchange. A tall, lean, hard-knuckled man, he started his work life in the open boat that rose through the fistfights, steamboat races, and a private war against an American who made himself a dictator of Nicaragua, nicknamed the Commodore. He moved from steamship to rail in 1863, taking over New York's Harlem and Hudson Rivers railroads in 1867. He seized the mighty New York Central in a fight with the new management by cutting off New York City from all the rail traffic to the interior, causing its stock prices to collapse. In 1868, he collided with his first friend, Daniel Drew, in what appeared to become known as the Erie War. Drew was a pious churchman who specialized in the insider trading, which wasn't only legal, but made him, quote, reliable in the eyes of the first credit agency in America. He was also a dictator and treasurer of the Erie Railway, whose stock routinely shortened that manipulated down. Vanderbilt wanted a rising market to help him grow by still more New York Central shares on margin. Drew agreed to assist but couldn't help himself. He cheated Vanderbilt with a short-selling operation in shares that causes the market overall to fall. Furious, Vanderbilt sought the revenge by cornering Erie stock by buying up all the available shares. Quote, "I'm not afraid of my enemies," Vanderbilt declared, "but my God, You must look out for when you get among your friends. End quote. The Erie board feared it was an attempt to take over the company and monopolize the majority of New York's railways. The board's defense was organized by a pair of new directors, the brash, corpulent Jim Fisk and the quiet, black-bearded Jay Gould, who once wrote, quote, "There are magician skills to be learned on Wall Street, and I mean to learn them." Gould used all of them against Vanderbilt, employing various ruses to issue massive amounts of new stock. A judge aligned with Vanderbilt, who had an issue with the injunction against new stock, then ordered the arrest of Erie directors for contempt for violating his order. In response, the board of one of America's biggest corporations made a panicking fight to legal the refuge in New Jersey. Quote, each director lugging off on a new account book, desk, drawer, or much of the red tape documents as could be grasped in the hurry of the moment, the New York Herald reported. There, Fisk tried to shift his focus to the threat of monopoly, telling the press that they were fighting to keep the food prices low for, quote, the poor classes especially, end quote. Gould dealt with the legal question by going to Albany with a checkbook. Quote, for 3 days he wooed legislatures and liberals supply food, drink, and greenbacks, end quote. Writes historian Maury Klein, the state legislature proved open to these arguments. It overwhelmingly passed a bill to legalize new stock. Vanderbilt corner collapsed. Why was the new stock bad? There was its dubious legality, of course, and also deliberately damaged the price of hurting existing shareholders, but there was something deeper at stake. At the time, typical shares were issued with a face value of $100 each, known as a par value. This was supposed to represent an expenditure of $100 of real capital, land, physical plant, rolling stock, and the like. And if you founded a railroad and needed to spend $6 million to build it, you were supposed to issue 60,000 shares with a par value of $100. Par value mattered to Americans who made shares tangible and be honest. The market value was expected to fluctuate around this figure, not steadily rise. Investors look for a return in the form of dividends, often called interest on capital. In other words, one share stock certificate stood for $100 of physical stuff, which management used to make a profit, which was then distributed as a dividend. Stock issued beyond the construction cost was called watered stock. The term originated in livestock markets, where Drew got his start, from practice including cattle to drink heavily before weighing and sale. Another term was overcapitalization. The problem wasn't dilution of the share stock value, but the excess stock represented nothing. It broke faith with the literal, tangible concept of shares. To understand this very concrete mindset, it helps to remember the workings of the gold standard from which the federal government briefly departed during and after the Civil War. Paper notes were simply a marker for metal. In theory, one could return a $10 note and get $10 gold coin. The gold itself, they thought, was real money. The volume of gold limited the value of the paper currency. They saw a stock certificate in a similar light as the token of $100 worth of stuff that limited the number of shares. Frisk's flamboyance and Gould's bribes made Erie a watered stock, seemed obviously crooked. Yet overt corruption was beside the point of economic thinkers. Conventional wisdom insisted the economy in general comprised tangible things. Quote, transportation cannot add to wealth, argued Charles Francis Adams Jr., a leading financial journalist and later president of the Union Pacific. Quote, it never makes 1 ton 2. Service, growth, market share, earnings, and intellectual property, none of it played a role in calculating the value of the company. Only what you could touch mattered. The expectation of dividends was key. Their size and certainly drove market prices if a corporation issued excess stock. Investors feared it would fail to maintain dividends. If it did pay dividends on watered stock, the public assumed it was being overcharged. Henry Poor condemned stock watering in 1869. Such enormous additions to capital of companies without any increase in facilities threatened more than anything else to destroy the value of the railway property, as well as to prove the most obsessive to the public. The argument took a turn at April 5, 1882, when a 23-year-old state assemblyman named Theodore Roosevelt accused Gould of corrupting a state judge in order to monopolize New York City's evaluated railway system. Oddly, it wasn't the monopoly that bothered him, though. He was focused on Gold's use of a fraudulent company, the Manhattan Elevated Railroad. The company issued stock without building anything. The new element that Gould and his associate used to function a holding company, a corporation that exists simply to own its other corporations. First, they bought the railroad and bought control of the 2 elevated railway companies operating in the city, but they were barred by the law from merging. So Gould's party took control of the Manhattan Elevated Railroad, which had never gone into operation, existing only on paper. Gould's party leased the other 2 lines to unite them under one management. Holding companies violated Roosevelt's conventional economic morality because its stock didn't represent actual construction. But it couldn't stop Gould, who cleverly used leasing, not ownership, to get around state law. It foreshadowed what came next. In 1889, New York explicitly authorized corporate ownership of other corporations. Holding companies chartered in New York, New Jersey, went on to play a central role on manufacturing a merger boom that started in the 1890s. Between 1897 and 1904, historian Jean Strauss writes, 4,277 firms consolidated into 257. The 100 largest concerns quadrupled in size and took control of 40% of the country's industrial capacity. The maestro of this movement was J.P. Morgan. The banker was raven wing mustache, overripe nose, and chef's knife mind. His campaign to combine companies and rationalize industries culminated the U.S. Steel in 1901. Its holding company, Morgan, capitalized it, in parentheses, at $100 per share, end parentheses. Not based on older notions of construction costs, in parentheses, since it built nothing, end parentheses, but at the level he believed the market would bear, an unprecedented $1.4 billion with a B, dollars. You're now listening to articles and features of the review on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service, continuing on at 14 minutes and 30 seconds past the hour. Still, the idea of stocks meant stuff persisted. The Wall Street Journal declared on the front page, quote, "We regard it as unfortunate that the new steel companies should have carried the tendency toward overcapitalism further. The figures can hardly fail to create an impression that consumers of iron and steel to be asked to pay dividends on a watered stock. As president, Roosevelt continued to attack overcapitalization, but Congress lacked the political will to act against it. Doing so would have required a federal override of state laws, and corporation-friendly Republican Party had no appetite for that. If he had it this way, it would have rendered holding companies effectively illegal. The great movement toward corporate concentration might have collapsed, and antitrust laws would become almost moot. Is stocks watering immoral? An ethicist asked the 1906 essay. In the first decade of the 20th century, moralists and financiers debated the question as never before because the law and economic morality were changing rapidly. In 1907, members of the Economic Club of New York declared, quote, there was no such thing as overcapitalization, arguing that it posed no problem for society. Which brings us back to Rockefeller. In 1911, the antitrust decision forced Standard Oil to spin off 33 subsidiaries. He retained his stake as all of those companies. He reached his first billion in 1916 when a share of Standard Oil sold for $567. A journalist added to this the market value of the share in each of the subsidiaries to find equivalent to a share in a pre-breakup corporation of $2,014, far beyond the once all-important per value of $100. It only happened because the link between tangible stuff and stock prices were broken. In many ways, the new abstract of the finances has been a good thing. The imagination of the market pushed past old limits. Companies whose value is built intangible are able to attract investments and flourish. The modern idea of shares makes it possible for the economy we have today, in which service and intellectual property play a larger role than just manufacturing. The notion that the stocks in a digital or financial services corporation could be worth no more than the value of the office equipment seems absurd, and for good reason. But it's not without cost. The old idea of share was imposed simply as an intuitive limit on the size of corporations and the polarization of wealth. It disciplined greed in the interests of the investors and the public, or so we thought. As of 1906, ethicists wrote, quote, the men who believe that it is improper, intolerable, and wrong for monopolistic concerns to obtain more than a reasonable rate of interest, i.e., profit on capital invested, easily constitutive a large majority of American people, end quote. That speaks up both sides of the economic debate, which continues to this day. Corporate power and wealth disparity, both powered by the stock markets, America still has a lot of tools, and the turn of the century Americans developed to address them. Respectfully, antitrust enforcement and the progressive income tax. But we've never replaced that ethics of restraint that lost the limits of shares. Musk's incomprehensible trillion-dollar net worth feels like more an inflection point, giving rising discontent and wealth polarization and political influence of billionaires. It is the kind of moment that might give rise to a new ethic, to new laws that will reshape the corporate world. Our next headline: you have no idea what $1 trillion is. Even trained mathematicians have a hard time visualizing this number. By Ben Cohen. Picture a line with $1 million on the left and $1 trillion on the right. Where would you place the billion? $1 billion is all the way on the left, crunched up against the $1 million mark, and nowhere close to $1 trillion. But research shows that many people follow their intuition and treat numbers and evenly spaced, placing the billion roughly in the middle. As it turns out, in such a large number, we can't wrap our minds around it. $1 trillion is 1,000 times more than $1 billion. But Let's be honest. I could have told you it was a million times more, and you probably would have believed me. Not long ago, the word trillionaire only appeared in the Wall Street Journal as hyperbole. It was obviously an exaggerated way of describing an inconceivable fortune, like calling someone a bazillionaire. Now that SpaceX has gone public, it might apply to Elon Musk, and it's fitting that the words first trillionaire has designed on sending people to destinations unfathomably far away, since the sheer magnitude of a trillion is impossible for us to even fathom. So let's make it up. So let's make it possible. A million seconds ago was about 2 weeks ago. A billion seconds ago was in 1994 when Pulp Fiction was about to open theaters. What about a trillion seconds? Whatever number is in your head, you might want to add a few millennia, because a trillion seconds ago would have put us back to the Ice Age. Here's one way to comprehend the incomprehensible scale of $1 trillion. Let's say you begin stacking pennies. First 10, then 100, then 1,000. Let's also say the tower of pennies stays intact as you keep piling them higher and higher and higher until you reach $1 million. 1 million pennies, mind you. 1 million pennies is about a mile high. 1 billion pennies is about 1,000 miles. Nearly the distance from New York City to Cape Canaveral, Florida. 1 trillion pennies? That's a flight to the moon and back. Not once, but twice. Back on this planet, where we were mere thoughts of a trillions can break our brains, I called David Landy, a Netflix data scientist and Indiana University adjunct professor of psychological brain science who studies the perception and abstract ideas in quantities. Quote, "We are living in a world where we are not built to understand," he told me. To survive in a world, he explained, we have to develop systems that are remarkably successful, except when they're not. In this case, that means shrinking gigantic numbers down to basic words that anyone can understand. 1 million, 1 billion, and 1 trillion. They came in a list, and they used it for that list, Landy said. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. What's harder to understand is that million, billion, trillion are not alike as 1, 2, 3. In a series of experiments, Landy showed how hard it was by giving people a line similar to the one you saw earlier. The research was inspired by the fact that even the mathematically trained academics in his lab struggled with the enormous numbers, and the bigger they are, the harder they are to grasp. So he wasn't surprised by the results. Despite their importance in public disclosure, Landy and his colleagues wrote in a 2013 paper, quote, "Numbers in range from 1 million to 1 trillion are notoriously difficult to understand," end quote. Our next headline, house robots are coming. They'll be dangerously cute. Adorable machines have a secret advantage when it comes to their human owners. By Ryan Kalo. If there's a robot in your house, chances are it's a Roomba. But it could be about to change. A new generation of home robots is coming. Adorable, loaded with contemporary artificial intelligence and designed to charm their way into your homes. One of the newest comes from the creator of the Roomba himself, Colin Angle. Soft, furry, and about the size of a dog, the robot is called the Familiar, leveraging the magic of AI to form intimate bonds with members of the household, ambling from the room to room and logging information about its owners. Robots comes with risks, Any machine capable of connecting to the internet, for example, comes with security concerns. In 2009, my colleagues at the University of Washington showed the internet connected household robots can be compromised remotely. More research, more recent research suggests introducing AI only exacerbates vulnerabilities. The worst a hacked Roomba could do is a trip you in the nearest in the worst a hacked Roomba can do is trip you nearer the stairs. The familiar, according to its creator, is large enough or mobile enough to follow you to kitchen or to drag you off the couch to take a walk. Yikes. Equally, worrying is something far more elemental, the dangers of cuteness. As roboticist Katie Darling illustrates in the 2021 book, The New Breed, what our history with animals reveals about our future with robotics. It doesn't take much for people to form bonds with anthropomorphic machines. People already bond with their Roombas, giving them names, taking them on vacations, hosting Roomba playdates. According to daring research, there are just robots designed to clean the floor. In 1999, Sony released the Abio robot dog, AIBO. People loved it. Its sleek, furless Abio sold out over and over. But Sony discontinued the original model in 2016 as part of a broader cost-cutting measure. Then it discontinued its services and repaired for Abio within months. Owners were devastated. In Japan, Abio owners held mass funerals in the century-old Buddhist temple. No joke. Sony Abio was just a bellwether. Quote, "There's no question many people will have such machines in their homes eventually," Darling told me, and developed a real emotional connection to them. What if familiar falls on hard times? What sort of commitments are in place to support owners as they're being beloved by familiars degrade? The creator of the familiar say, by default, the robot will not send data to the cloud, and it will ask for permission to access the internet. But iRobot, the company Engel led 3 decades before, left in 2024 to start the new company building the familiar, declaring bankruptcy last year. European authorities blocked its acquisition by Amazon. There are vulnerability manufactured machines, said Woodward Hadscott, a professor of law and computer science in Northeastern University, who studies anthropomorphic robots. Even if they are known for a companion, it is just a robot. It doesn't seem to stop us from being manipulated. Our vulnerability to robots comes in part of the mismatch between what we expect a person or pet to be capable of and what AI-enabled robots can actually do. The expectation gap, as it is known for, can be very unsettling. A robot that looks human but it behaves differently is creepy, and in effect known for the uncanny valley. Ultimately, the problem with having any technology in your home, let alone a cute technology, is someone else's design to control it. You come home after a long day of work, and there it waits your robot companions. Big eyes quivering, he is also excited to share the new update. Now you can buy virtual food with which to feed him. In fact, you kind of have to. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Ring service. The time is 29 minutes and 20 seconds past the hour. Headline: His painting of a pool broke records. The artist rocketed into art world pantheon and exuberant landscapes and evocates portraits that made him one of the fathers of British pop art. By Brenda Corin. David Hockney, the rocketed into art's world pantheon with exuberant landscapes, evocative portraits, and vivid paintings of swimming pools, died at age 88, according to his publicist. His depiction of familiar images, often made a palatable, bright acrylics, earned him the mantle of one of the father's British pop art. But Hockney didn't ally himself with the movement or any other, insisting his vast overture hinged simply on looking, always looking. The world is very, very beautiful if you look at it, but most people don't look very much, do they? Hockney said in a 2019 interview from Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Hemblock, Denmark. Quote, they scan the ground in front of them so they can walk, so they don't really look at things incredibly well with intensity as I do. Hockney died peacefully at home on Thursday with his publicist Eric Bolton said, the modest roots of the West Yorkshire, England, Hockney Swifted established himself in the world art dynamo, first conquering London, then settling out to become the Parisini of Los Angeles, a reference to the 18th century artist whose etchings documented to the Italy of the time, later devoting him to English and French landscapes. His restless intellect and self-confidence propelled him toward a color-soaked figurative work, and not the abstract expressions of pop art for many of his peers. Hockney owned his unique aesthetic with travel with ravenous appetite and experimentation of technology. For more than 60 years, he hopscotched among media, oils, acrylics, and watercolors, drawings, making prints, and creating works on fax and copy machines, as well as iPads and iPhones. He designed sets for plays and backdrops for operas using his iPad, creating a hawthorn blossom pattern which were stained glass windows in the Westminster Abbey to honor the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. Puckish and determined, Hockney didn't shrink for mutinies, small or large. A tobacco enthusiast since the age of 16, he ignited a fervor during the COVID-19 pandemic by musing publicly whether smokers might be immune to the virus. Although passionate reader, he was terrible speller, immortalized T-T-E-A as T-A-E. In 1961 painting, he flouted art school rules and declined to hide his homosexuality in the area as many did. When hearing loss in his middle age drove him to rely on hearing aids, he credited his affiliation and affection with sharpening his awareness of the world around him by enhancing his art. Blockbuster's exhibitionist Hockney crowd-pleasing drew record crowd numbers and visitors to museums. In 2018, his paintings of Portrait of an Artist, quote, pool with two figures, sold for $90.3 million at the time, the highest amount of a living artist at auction. He also known for his portraits, often couples such as friends, the writer Christopher Ashwood and artist Don Bacchadi. Other subjects included Hockney's dachshunds, Stanley and Buttigieg, friends such as textile designer Celia Britwell and curator Henry Gutzberg, and family including his mother and father. The artist also chronicled his own face and his physique and youth and throughout the old age, infliging depictions of as the time rolled. Hockney was born in 1937 at Bradford, England. As a boy, he was drawn to painting and the mechanics of moving from brush to pot to canvas. In interviews, he recalled being transfixed as a child by watching his father use fresh paint to make battered bicycles look brand new. He gravitated towards art class, and the school said at age 7 he decided to become an artist. In 1959, he moved from London to study at the Royal College of Art. Amid a cosmopolitan circle.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes